Have you ever looked at someone you once loved deeply and realized they no longer recognize the person you've become? What would you do if, after years of building a life together, the person who once held your hand in the dark replaced you publicly, quietly, without apology? Evelyn Hartley had spent decades by Richard's side, building a legacy, supporting his rise, sacrificing silently. And then, one evening at a glittering charity gala, he appeared with someone else, a younger woman, polished, poised, sitting in the very seat Evelyn used to call her own. In that moment, Evelyn had a choice: vanish into bitterness, or return not to reclaim a title, but to remind the world and herself of who she truly was. If you were in her place, would you have had the strength to walk back into that room? This is not a story about revenge. It's a story about rediscovery, dignity, and the quiet power of rising in silence. Take a breath and ask yourself, what would you do if your absence spoke louder than your presence ever did? If this question stirs something in you, like, share and subscribe, because this story might just help you find a piece of yourself you thought was lost. Now, let's begin. The afternoon sun bathed the Hartley estate in a soft golden hue, casting long shadows across the polished oak floors of the sitting room. Outside the large bay window, the early spring breeze stirred the white magnolia blossoms, their petals fluttering gently like secrets too shy to speak. Evelyn Hartley sat motionless in the corner armchair, her back straight, a delicate china teacup resting in her hand. She hadn't taken a sip in the last 20 minutes. The tea had gone cold, but she didn't mind. She wasn't thirsty. Not for tea, anyway. The envelope sat on the side table, ivory cardstock, heavy to the touch, with embossed lettering in deep blue Tomorrow Scholars' Annual Benefit Gala. The same gala she had helped found 17 years ago. But now her name wasn't on the list of hosts. It hadn't been for the past 3 years. She picked up the invitation again, slowly tracing the edges with her finger. A soft smile tugged at the corner of her lips, not out of joy, but the kind of quiet resignation that comes when life stops asking for your opinion and starts making decisions for you. From the hallway, footsteps echoed, firm, confident. Richard. He walked into the room with his usual presence, wearing a suit tailored to perfection, as if he had just stepped off the cover of a business magazine. He barely glanced at Evelyn as he poured himself a glass of sparkling water from the bar cart. "I assume you received the invitation," he said, not as a question, but a fact already known. Evelyn nodded once, calm and composed. Yes, Richard didn't sit. He sipped the water, then continued. "I'll be attending. Monica will be accompanying me. She's looking forward to it." A pause. Evelyn didn't flinch. She looked down at her teacup, then placed it gently on the saucer. "She does enjoy the spotlight," she said, her voice as soft as silk, without bitterness. Richard glanced at her, the faintest furrow of irritation between his brows. But he said nothing. "I wasn't planning on staying home this year," Evelyn continued, lifting her gaze to meet his. "Not for the gala, not any more." There it was, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, quickly masked by a shrug. "Well, that's your choice," he said, turning away. "It'll be a full house. Just be mindful." Of what she asked, her tone steady, unbothered. He didn't answer. As he left the room, Evelyn remained seated, the silence stretching long behind him like a trail of forgotten promises. The air seemed heavier now, not because of what had been said, but because of what hadn't. Later that evening, Evelyn stood in the master bedroom, surrounded by soft lamplight and the muted hum of distant traffic. She opened the tall closet doors, staring at rows of dresses she hadn't worn in years. They reminded her of galas gone by, of moments when Richard still reached for her hand under the table and whispered promises only she believed. She ran her fingers along a navy blue silk gown, then paused at a cream-colored piece with hand-stitched beading. She remembered wearing it to the third gala, the night she'd spoken about hope and education, and cried afterward in the bathroom, overwhelmed by how far they had come, and how far they'd later fall. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at her feet, bare against the hardwood floor. The house was quiet, too quiet. It used to be filled with music, with laughter, with Richard reading her articles out loud, asking for her thoughts. Now, even the sound of her breath felt too loud. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. Was she doing this out of pride, out of hurt? What if people stared, whispered? But then she remembered the scholarship letters from students she used to mentor, the way they would light up when she believed in them, the way it used to make her feel like she mattered. And she realized she wasn't going for Richard. She wasn't going for Monica. She was going for herself. She stood up, straighter this time, and walked to her vanity. Tomorrow night, Evelyn Hartley would be seen again, not as Richard's wife, not as the woman he replaced, but as herself. The next morning came quietly, the kind of overcast hush that made the entire house feel like it was holding its breath. Evelyn Hartley stood in front of the tall mirror in her dressing room. The light outside was dim, but it was enough to catch the soft lines that had started to form around her eyes, lines that spoke of laughter once shared and silences endured. Her fingers hovered over a drawer of jewelry, pearls, diamonds, old brooches that once belonged to her mother, but she wasn't reaching for them just yet. Instead, she looked at herself. There was a time she barely recognized the woman in the mirror, not because of age, but because she had begun to disappear behind someone else's life. Richard's, his board meetings, his guest lists, his victories. She had loved him. That was never in question. She loved him when they had nothing but shared dreams and late-night pancakes in their first one-bedroom apartment. She had loved him through every late meeting, every exhausted "I'm doing this for us." And even when his eyes stopped lighting up at the sight of her. But love, she had learned, cannot thrive where it is not seen. She picked up a simple gold hairpin and tucked a strand behind her ear. Her reflection watched her carefully, quietly, like someone reacquainting themselves with an old friend. For the first time in a long time, she asked herself, what do I want to be remembered for? Not for being the gracious Mrs. Hartley, not for politely smiling through gossip columns that speculated about Richard's increasingly public outings with Monica. She wanted to be remembered for what she built, what she gave, what she endured, and how she chose to rise above it. In the late morning light, Evelyn wandered down to the study. Dust had settled on the old filing cabinet in the corner, the one she used to store all the proposals and grant applications from tomorrow's scholars, back when it was still their vision. Now it was Richard's PR highlight, a polished emblem of generosity that made headlines and invited handshakes. But she remembered when it was just a table, a cause, and a notebook filled with scribbles and hopes. She pulled open the drawer. The scent of old paper hit her like a memory. One folder was labeled First Year Stories. Inside were letters from students, many of whom had gone on to college, the military, or trade schools. Some had written back, telling her how one scholarship, one kind word had made all the difference. She clutched a letter dated 2010. The handwriting was crooked but full of gratitude. Ms. Hartley, I was going to quit school, but now I'm thinking about becoming a teacher. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Evelyn's breath caught for just a second. She folded the letter and held it close. This was her why. By early evening, Evelyn returned to her bedroom. The gala was only hours away. She chose a dress she hadn't worn in years, midnight blue velvet, soft at the sleeves, the hem falling just below her ankles. It didn't shimmer or shout. It didn't need to. She ran her fingers over the fabric, remembering the last time she wore it. It was their 10th anniversary. Richard had surprised her with a weekend trip to Nantucket, back when surprises still existed between them. For a moment, she let the memory wash over her, his hand on her back as they danced under string lights, the warmth of his voice in her ear. Then she folded it away. She wasn't going to that gala for the man Richard used to be. She was going for the woman she had become. That night, as she applied her makeup, slowly, thoughtfully, Evelyn whispered to her reflection, "You're not invisible." It wasn't defiance. It was a quiet reclamation. She didn't need Richard to validate her place in that room. She had earned it, step by step, in every silent act of strength. When she finally stepped back from the mirror, something shifted in her reflection, not just beauty, but presence. She turned out the lights, leaving only the glow of a hallway lamp behind her, and walked down the stairs, one steady step at a time. The ballroom of the Fairmount Grand shimmered under the glow of 1,000 tiny lights, suspended like stars across the high arched ceiling. Gold-accented walls reflected the elegance of the city's most exclusive gathering, where Boston's elite arrived in tailored tuxedos and silken gowns, laughter like champagne bubbles floating in the air. Richard Hartley walked through the grand entrance with Monica Sloane on his arm. He looked exactly as a man of his stature was expected to look, flawless. His tuxedo was bespoke, pressed to perfection. His hair, dark with threads of silver at the temples, was neatly combed back. The cufflinks gleamed at his wrists, monogrammed and unmistakably expensive. He gave a nod to the photographers at the door, one hand gently guiding Monica forward, his smile easy but distant. Tonight, he was not just attending a gala, he was performing. The room responded accordingly. Heads turned, whispers followed. That's Richard Hartley, and she must be Monica. She wore a red satin dress that clung to every curve like a promise. Bold, deliberate. She was younger, stunning in a way that demanded attention, not affection, and attention was exactly what she came for. As they crossed the room, Monica leaned in, her voice like smoke. "You're the star tonight." Richard smirked, offering a tight nod. As long as the donations come through, he had trained himself to focus on outcomes, money, connections, control. But even as he smiled and shook hands with senators, CEOs, and socialites, something in the way his eyes flickered suggested the performance was taking effort. Because beneath the charm, something was off. He couldn't name it. Not yet. Near the bar, Monica spotted someone she recognized and pulled Richard toward them. He followed out of habit, not interest. They made small talk with a finance tycoon and his wife. Monica laughed easily, tossing her hair, her red lipstick framing every smile like a dare. Richard played his part engaging, assertive, magnetic. But in moments between words, his gaze would drift, searching. He didn't expect Evelyn to show. He had said that to himself, to Monica, to anyone who might ask. But somewhere inside, he knew it wasn't certainty, it was hope, wrapped in denial. Because her absence would make things easier, because her presence would make things real. And that scared him more than he'd like to admit. The evening pressed on. Waiters floated between guests with trays of wine and hors d'oeuvres. The air smelled of jasmine and money. Richard spoke to the chairman of the scholarship board, offering reassurances about future funding. He talked about numbers, visibility, expansion, everything that made a project look good on paper. The man smiled, nodded, impressed. But as they parted ways, Richard felt the faintest sense of disconnection, like he had just spoken all the right words and none of the right truth. Back at their table near the center of the room, Monica crossed her legs and leaned back, sipping champagne like it was her throne. "You should see the way they look at you," she purred, "like you're untouchable." Richard chuckled, but the sound lacked conviction. "Do you think Evelyn will come?" Monica asked suddenly, her voice still playful but laced with challenge. Richard's hand paused mid-reach for his glass. "I doubt it," he said, a little too quickly. Monica arched an eyebrow. "You sound disappointed." He didn't reply. She tilted her head, her smile tightening ever so slightly. "You know, if she does come, it'll only be because she wants to remind people she still matters." Richard stared at the amber swirl in his glass. "She doesn't have to remind anyone," he said quietly. Monica blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me, she just does," he added, covering the moment with a casual sip. In that brief silence, a shadow of Evelyn passed through Richard's mind, not the Evelyn people knew now, but the woman who used to argue with him about strategy at midnight, who once stayed up sewing table banners for their first fundraiser when they couldn't afford a printer. She had always believed in the mission, in the meaning, long before he learned how to leverage it. Back then, she made him feel like more than a man chasing numbers. Now, he couldn't remember the last time he felt anything like that. The MC took the stage, signaling the beginning of formal remarks. Lights dimmed. Guests turned toward the podium. A polite hush settled over the crowd. Richard smiled on cue, applauded on time, and clinked glasses with Monica when appropriate. But beneath the surface, something inside him stirred. It was small at first, a flicker of discomfort, a whisper of what if? What if Evelyn did walk in? What if the woman he had once loved with such clarity stepped into the room, not as a ghost of the past, but as a force of her own? What would he do? What would it reveal? He looked toward the ballroom entrance almost involuntarily. It was still empty, but his chest tightened anyway. The clatter of crystal and silver danced lightly across the ballroom as laughter swirled among the guests. The gala was in full swing. Now glasses raised, cameras flashed, deals quietly whispered over linen-draped tables. It was a symphony of charm and pretense. No one noticed the woman stepping out of the black town car until the doorman opened the gilded entrance. And then everything paused just for a moment. Evelyn Hartley stood beneath the archway, her presence quiet, yet undeniable. The soft navy velvet of her gown shimmered in the light, not with extravagance, but elegance. The neckline was modest, the sleeves long. But she wore it with a grace that silenced the noise before her. Her heels clicked softly on the marble floor as she entered, each step deliberate but unhurried. She didn't scan the room. She didn't need to. She knew who would be watching. Inside, Richard Hartley turned at the exact moment she entered. He didn't move. Couldn't. His breath hitched almost imperceptibly, but enough to make Monica glance up at him. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Monica followed his gaze and froze. Her smile faltered. So did the laughter at their table. All around the ballroom, heads turned, not out of obligation, but out of instinct. There was something about the way Evelyn held herself, chin lifted, shoulders relaxed, eyes calm that commanded attention without demanding it. She wasn't performing. She was arriving. A waiter passed by, offering champagne. Evelyn declined with a gentle wave of her hand. Instead, she moved through the room with measured grace, stopping to greet a retired judge she once worked with, then a young teacher she'd mentored years ago through the scholarship program. With each encounter, her voice was soft but sure, her smile real. There were no rehearsed lines, no need for validation, because Evelyn Hartley had not come to be noticed. She had come to remember who she was. Richard watched her from across the room, something foreign pressing against his ribs, regret, admiration. He wasn't sure. He was used to being the center of gravity in any room. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, he felt himself pulled into someone else's orbit. Monica leaned in, her voice cool. "She looks different." "She looks like herself," Richard said, before he could stop the words. Monica stiffened, fingers tightening slightly on the stem of her glass. Evelyn made her way to a small circle of donors near the silent auction display. The room buzzed faintly with their enthusiasm for bidding wars and charitable returns, but Evelyn's attention was focused elsewhere. She stood before a framed photo on an easel, an image of a scholarship recipient from the very first cohort of Tomorrow Scholars. A boy with bright eyes and a toothy grin, holding a certificate Evelyn herself had signed. She smiled quietly. Her name wasn't under the photo anymore. The caption now read, "Made possible by the Hartley Foundation." She didn't feel anger, just distance, like watching a home she built being repainted in colors she never chose. Still, she didn't regret showing up, not tonight. Back at the main table, Monica leaned toward Richard again, her voice lower this time. "Should we go say hello?" Richard's brow furrowed. "Do you want to?" Monica forced a smile. "It might look good." Richard hesitated, then shook his head. "Let her be." Monica looked away, her jaw tight. As the evening carried on, Evelyn's presence settled over the gala like a quiet tide. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, but slowly, organically, conversations began to shift toward her. People remembered. They remembered her speeches from years past, the tireless fundraisers, the way she used to sit with students and their families, listening like it truly mattered. And tonight, with nothing but her presence, she reminded them all again. Later, Evelyn stepped outside onto the garden terrace, away from the noise. The cool air brushed against her skin, carrying the distant sound of a cello playing inside. She leaned against the stone railing, looking up at the stars beyond the city glow. Behind her, someone stepped out. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. "Richard, I wasn't sure you'd come," he said quietly. Evelyn kept her eyes on the skyline. "That makes two of us." He stepped closer, but left a respectful distance between them. "You look—" he began, then stopped. "You look well." "I am well," she said, still not turning around. "And thank you." A long pause settled between them. When she finally turned, her expression was gentle but unreadable. "Enjoy your evening, Richard," she said, then walked past him, back into the ballroom. And he let her go. Not because he wanted to, but because in that moment he knew he no longer held the power to keep her from walking away. Inside the ballroom, the air buzzed with conversation and clinking glasses, but Richard Hartley sat silent at his table, his bourbon glass untouched. The velvet hum of cellos in the background couldn't quiet the static in his head. Evelyn's presence still lingered in the space, even though she had returned to the crowd. There was no mistaking it. Something had shifted. It wasn't just the way others had started gravitating toward her. It was something far deeper, something inside him. He watched her across the room. She was speaking with an older couple, both retired teachers who had once volunteered for tomorrow's scholars. Evelyn was smiling gently, listening intently. Her body slightly leaned forward the way she always did when someone spoke from the heart. That small gesture used to be his anchor. Now, it reminded him of everything he had lost without even noticing it slipping away. Monica Sloane was still beside him, but her tone had grown clipped, her smile brittle at the corners. She'd noticed, of course. Evelyn's presence had cast a new kind of light, one that revealed Monica's polished shine for what it truly was. Surface deep. "I don't know what people are whispering about," Monica said, swirling her wine. "You'd think she invented charity." Richard didn't answer. He was too busy reliving memories he thought he'd buried. Evelyn's voice, calm and certain, echoing in his head. "What matters most is not how much you give, but whether you remember why you give at all." She had said that at the very first gala. Richard remembered the applause. He also remembered how she cried in the car afterward, overwhelmed, exhausted, proud. He hadn't seen her cry in years. Worse, he'd stopped looking. As the evening wore on, Richard found himself more and more detached. Every toast felt hollow. Every compliment aimed at him rang like metal against glass, shiny, but cold. He had everything a man was supposed to want: power, respect, a stunning woman by his side, a foundation that bore his name. But tonight, as Evelyn moved through the crowd with quiet assurance, Richard couldn't shake the thought. "She is everything I lost while I was busy pretending I had it all. At one point, A board member clapped him on the back and leaned in. Great turnout. Hartley, your wife looks absolutely radiant tonight. The man didn't mean to mock. He genuinely didn't know. Monica froze beside him, her glass halting mid-air. She's not, Monica began, but Richard cut in smoothly. Thank you, he said, offering a tight smile. She's always carried herself with grace. The board member nodded and drifted off, oblivious. Monica leaned in, eyes flashing. You didn't correct him. I didn't need to, Richard replied quietly. She studied him, her expression hardening. Are you regretting something? He exhaled, not in annoyance, but exhaustion. I don't know. Maybe I'm remembering something. Monica crossed her arms, her tone sharpening. Well, maybe you should start remembering who you're with now. Richard turned to face her fully, his eyes steadier than she expected. That's exactly what I'm trying to do, he said. Later. As the crowd drifted toward the auction stage, Richard slipped away to the edge of the ballroom. From there, he had a clear view of Evelyn laughing gently with a young woman in a simple green dress, one of the new scholarship recipients, perhaps. He watched as Evelyn bent slightly to adjust the girl's necklace, her hand resting briefly on the young woman's shoulder. That used to be Evelyn's gift, her ability to make people feel seen. Richard had once been on the receiving end of that gift. Now he was just another bystander. He stepped outside, the terrace air crisp against his skin. The city lights blinked in the distance like fireflies trapped behind glass. His fingers tightened around the banister. What are you doing, Richard? He asked himself silently. This wasn't about Evelyn. Not entirely. It was about the version of himself he had become. He had convinced himself that success meant status, that silence meant peace, that Evelyn's quiet withdrawal was just part of aging, of change. But the truth was uglier. He had stopped listening, stopped asking, stopped loving her in ways that mattered. And now, standing out here alone while Evelyn re-entered the world he'd tried to build without her, he felt like an emperor in an empty castle, rich, powerful, and profoundly alone. When he returned to the ballroom, Evelyn was on the other side of the room, listening to the auctioneer explain the rules of bidding. Her hands were clasped, her expression thoughtful. And then, suddenly, she looked up and met his eyes. Just for a second. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. She simply held his gaze. And in that brief, fragile silence between them, Richard felt it, the weight of everything unspoken, the distance he had built, the part of himself still tethered to the woman he once called home. The low hum of conversation hushed as the stage lights brightened. A man in a charcoal suit stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone gently. The room turned its attention, polite and expectant. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, thank you for being part of another incredible night supporting tomorrow's scholars. We've raised over $600,000 so far, and we're just getting started. Applause rolled across the room. Richard Hartley clapped along from his table, his fingers tapping against each other, more from reflex than joy. Monica, beside him, leaned in, her voice barely audible. I told you, people love this night. Richard nodded, eyes still wandering across the room. He didn't say it, but this night didn't feel like his anymore. And now, The MC continued to share a few words about the Foundation's journey and the vision we hold for its future. Please welcome Monica Sloan. A ripple of polite surprise traveled through the audience. Richard's head snapped toward the stage. Wait, what? Monica stood up gracefully, adjusting her dress. They asked earlier. I said yes. Richard didn't stop her, but something in his gut shifted. Monica walked up confidently. She looked stunning poised, camera ready, but as soon as she reached the microphone, the room seemed to lean back. Thank you all for being here, she began, her tone syrupy. It's such a thrill to stand before all of you amazing people tonight. I've been proud to be part of this incredible legacy one that Richard and I care deeply about. Richard blinked. She continued. Philanthropy is not just about writing checks. It's about shining, about standing out, about showing the world you care. There was a beat of silence. She smiled brighter, trying to recover. I mean, standing up for what matters. That's what this foundation is about. The applause was tepid. Richard's jaw tightened. He looked across the room, and there, Evelyn sat, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable, but her eyes were clear. The MC returned quickly after Monica stepped down, trying to smooth the energy. Thank you, Monica, for those heartfelt words. And now, if I may, I'd like to invite someone very special to the stage. She helped found this gala, and her work has touched thousands of lives through Tomorrow Scholars. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Evelyn Hartley. A hush fell. For a heartbeat. No one moved. Then Evelyn rose. No dramatic flourish. No smile for the cameras. She simply stood, lifted her chin, and walked with quiet confidence toward the stage. Richard felt something tighten in his chest. Evelyn took the microphone, resting her hand gently on the podium. She waited for silence, not with a raised hand, not with force. She just stood still, and the room followed. I wasn't sure I'd speak tonight, she began. Her voice was soft, steady. To be honest, I wasn't sure I'd even come. A faint murmur of chuckles rippled across the audience. But then I remembered why this started. This wasn't built on galas or photo ops. It began in a church basement with handwritten notes and borrowed folding chairs. It started with kids who didn't believe anyone saw them, kids who thought hope was for other people. The room grew still. I remember one boy, Marcus. His father had left, his mother worked 2 jobs, and he came to us angry at the world. I asked him once, "What would make you feel safe enough to dream?" he said. "If someone believed I could." Evelyn paused. Her voice caught for just a moment, but she let the silence speak. That's what this is about. It's not about how much we give or how beautiful the ballroom is. It's about whether we still see the people we claim to help and whether we see each other. Her gaze swept the crowd without judgment, only truth. I'm not here to reclaim a title or a spotlight. I'm here because I still believe in what this can be, and I think maybe some of you still believe in it too. When she stepped back, the applause came slowly at first, then grew, not just polite, genuine. Richard stood. He didn't even think about it. His hands came together without permission from his pride. For the first time all evening, he looked not like a host, but like a man who had just remembered what humility felt like. Monica didn't clap. She sat stiffly, her eyes on Evelyn like glass cutting glass. Later, backstage, Evelyn folded her hands and let herself breathe. It was done. She hadn't rehearsed it. She hadn't needed to. Every word had been sitting quietly inside her, waiting for this moment not to prove something, but to let it go. Richard approached slowly, unsure of his welcome. That was. He began. She turned, calmly, necessary. He nodded, looking down. I didn't know she was going to speak. I believe you, Evelyn said, softly. He looked up, surprised. You do, I know you, she said, even when you forget who you are. Richard blinked, unsure how to respond, but Evelyn didn't wait for him to. She simply nodded once and walked away, her heels quiet on the marble floor. This time, it wasn't her leaving him, it was her finding herself. The ballroom, now warmed by Evelyn's speech, pulsed with a kind of reverence. Conversation softened. Laughter faded to respectful murmurs. For the first time in the evening, it felt less like a show and more like a gathering of souls. Then the auction began. The MC returned to the stage, his voice chipper, almost too eager to shift gears. All right, ladies and gentlemen, he called out, it's time for the highlight of our night, our live auction. The screen behind him flashed with images of the prizes, vacation packages, exclusive wine tastings, box seats at Fenway, even a custom-made sculpture. But the final item, item 10, held the crowd's attention. Now, for our final and most exclusive item, the MC announced with flair, a one-of-a-kind painting donated by Richard Hartley himself, Rise in Silence, a contemporary original valued at over $50,000. Gasps followed. The spotlight shifted to the painting displayed on an easel near the stage. It was striking bold strokes in deep crimson and charcoal, rising from a muted background. It radiated fire and control all at once. Whispers rippled through the room. Most didn't know that Richard had commissioned the piece privately for Monica. The artist was a rising name in New York, and Monica had insisted that having the piece displayed would elevate the prestige of the gala. It was her idea to include it in the auction, her way of showing she could give something of value, too. Now it stood under lights, open to the highest bidder. Bidding began. 10,000 someone called? 15, 20? The numbers climbed. Monica's face gleamed with pride as guests competed. Richard remained still, expression unreadable. 35 shouted a man in a dark suit. 40 came another voice. Then silence. The MC grinned, going once, going twice. A voice rose from the back. Calm, clear, 55,000. Heads turned. It was Evelyn. She stood with both hands resting lightly on the back of a gold-trimmed chair, unshaken. The MC blinked. 55,000 from Mrs. Hartley. Monica's mouth dropped slightly. Richard turned to Evelyn, stunned. The room buzzed. The MC laughed nervously. Any other bids? Silence. Sold to Mrs. Hartley. Applause erupted, part polite, part stunned. Evelyn stepped forward. I'd like the painting to be donated to the reading lounge at the South End Community Library, the place where the original scholarship interviews took place. She turned to the audience, her voice warm. Let it remind us that silence is where the strongest voices begin. A hush fell again, not empty, but full of weight. Then thunderous applause. Monica's hands trembled slightly in her lap. "That was my gift," she hissed toward Richard. "She just humiliated me." Richard didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on Evelyn. "She elevated it," he said quietly. Monica stared at him in disbelief. "You think that was graceful?" she snapped. "It was calculated." Richard shook his head. "It was intentional." "That's not the same thing." Later, in the foyer, where guests gathered their coats and whispered goodbyes, Evelyn stood by the large floral arrangement near the door. A few people stopped to thank her, some teary-eyed, others inspired. Richard approached her slowly, Monica trailing behind like a shadow about to dissolve. Evelyn turned slightly, acknowledging him with a nod. "That was bold," Richard said. "It was necessary," she replied. He searched her face for any trace of vindictiveness, but found none. "I should have known you'd still find a way to teach the room something." Evelyn's smile was soft, almost sad. "I'm not trying to teach, Richard. Just remind of who we were, of what mattered, of how easy it is to forget." She didn't say those words aloud. She didn't have to. As she walked toward the exit, the door opened before her. A spring wind met her cheeks, fresh, cool, freeing. She paused, breathing it in, then stepped forward into a night that, for the first time in years, felt like hers again. The ride home was quiet. Monica sat rigidly in the leather seat of the town car, her arms crossed over her lap, her gaze locked on the passing streetlights outside. Each one flickered over her face in cold rhythm light, shadow, light, shadow, like the alternating beats of composure and rage. Richard stared out the opposite window, one hand loosely resting on his knee, the other tangled in thoughts he hadn't yet named. His bow tie was undone, collar unbuttoned. The illusion of perfection had frayed. "She humiliated me," Monica finally said. He didn't reply. She knew exactly what she was doing. That speech, that bid, that performance. Still, silence. Monica turned to face him fully, her voice sharp. "Are you just going to sit there like she didn't walk into your gala and outshine both of us?" Richard blinked slowly, then turned toward her. "It wasn't about outshining," he said. "It was about reclaiming. For what a foundation she left." Monica scoffed. "She never left it," Richard replied, his voice low. "We just stopped seeing her in it." The words settled like dust on a glass surface, revealing everything Monica didn't want to acknowledge. Back at the penthouse, Monica stormed into the living room, heels clicking with purpose. She pulled the pins from her hair, letting the perfectly sculpted bun collapse into something messier. Richard followed at a slower pace. She poured herself a drink. Not wine this time, bourbon. His bourbon. "You're thinking about her," she accused, swirling the glass. "I never stopped," he admitted, not defiantly, but quietly, like someone surrendering, finally, to the truth. Monica froze. The glass trembled in her hand. "After everything, you still want her?" He met her eyes, and for the first time in months, she couldn't find the charm in them, just clarity. "She knows me," he said, "not the image, the man." "And what am I to you?" Monica asked. He hesitated. That was all the answer she needed. She set the glass down harder than necessary and walked toward the bedroom, the click of the door behind her like a final exclamation. Richard stood alone in the quiet, staring at the bottle on the table. For the first time, he didn't want to drink, Across town, Evelyn was back at the Hartley estate. The house greeted her the way it always did, too large, too quiet, too full of echoes. But something in her felt steadier now, like her presence filled the space in a new way. She slipped out of her heels, carried them in one hand as she moved through the hallway toward the garden outside. The moonlight glazed the stone pathway in silver. She sat on the bench beneath the old dogwood tree, the one Richard had planted for her on their 5th anniversary. It had grown tall and graceful, its branches like gentle arms arching above her. She didn't cry. There was nothing to mourn tonight, only truth to sit with, only peace to begin building. Inside the kitchen, she made herself a cup of tea this time. She drank it while it was hot. She opened her laptop, sifted through old files, and found the original charter of the Tomorrow Scholars Foundation. Her name was there in bold letters, her handwriting scanned in margins, her passion embedded in every clause. She read it like a letter to a younger self, one who still believed that love and purpose could coexist without competition. And as she saved a new version with a few updates, she smiled, not because of revenge, not because of triumph, but because the work still called her name. And this time, she would answer it. In the days that followed, the ripple effects of the gala stretched wide. Articles praised Evelyn's speech. Former donors reached out. Local journalists requested interviews. One even wrote, "Perhaps the true architect of tomorrow's scholars has always been the woman we stopped seeing." Monica declined public appearances. Rumors surfaced about tension in the Hartley circle. Richard canceled a major investment dinner. He spent more time walking, more time alone. One morning, he stopped by the library. Evelyn had mentioned the South End Community Library. The painting had already been hung. A group of high school students were gathered beneath it, talking softly. A librarian recognized him and offered a quiet nod. She didn't want a plaque, she said the art should speak for itself. Richard looked up at the painting, crimson and charcoal, rising from silence. It had never looked more alive, or more hers. It was just past 4 in the afternoon when Richard Hartley pulled his car into the gravel driveway of the Hartley estate. The tires crunched softly beneath him, the same way they had countless times before. But this time, he wasn't coming home. He was coming to find her. He sat in the car for a moment, staring at the familiar facade, brick and ivy, tall windows, the wide porch that used to glow warmly at night when Evelyn would leave a light on for him. There hadn't been a light for a long time. He got out, straightened his coat, and walked slowly up the steps. The wind was crisp but still. The air had the scent of early spring, earthy, renewing. He knocked. No answer. But then, through the glass pane, he saw her, in the back garden, under the dogwood tree. He followed the stone path around the house. Evelyn was seated on the old bench, a book open beside her, though she wasn't reading. She was watching the blossoms stir in the breeze, her expression calm, almost luminous, in the pale afternoon light. She heard his footsteps, but didn't turn. "Didn't think I'd find you here," Richard said, his voice soft. "I've always been here," she replied, eyes still on the tree, "just not in the ways you noticed." The words landed like a stone, gently placed, not thrown, not sharp, just true. He walked closer, then paused. "May I?" She gestured to the other end of the bench. "It's still your garden." "No," he said as he sat down. "I think it stopped being mine the moment I stopped tending to it." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't feel awkward, just unfinished. "I watched you that night," Richard began, "at the gala." "I know," she said, finally turning to face him. "You were extraordinary." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I wasn't trying to be. I was just being. That's what made it extraordinary." Another pause. "I should have said something sooner," Richard admitted. "Years ago." Evelyn looked away, her fingers running lightly over the spine of her book. "You said a lot, Richard," she said gently. "Just not with words. I was scared," he said. "Of me, of what it meant if I truly saw you again." She tilted her head slightly, intrigued. "I built a world where I was the center." He continued. "It worked for a while, but the world shrank. Without you, it got smaller, louder, but lonelier." Evelyn didn't speak. She let him unravel. "I thought success would fill the space, that being admired would mean being known," Richard said. "But admiration is shallow. It evaporates. You were the only one who ever actually saw me." She nodded, slowly. "And yet," she said, "you stopped seeing me." "I know," he whispered. "I wish I didn't wait until everything cracked to admit that." Evelyn looked at him fully now, her gaze steady. "I'm not angry anymore," she said. Richard looked surprised. "Really?" She smiled gently. "No, I think I was tired and disappointed, but not angry." "Then what do you feel now?" he asked. She paused. "Free," she said. It was the simplest answer, and it was everything. "I came to ask for forgiveness," Richard said. Evelyn shook her head softly. "You don't need my forgiveness to be whole, but I need it to move on." "No," she said, her voice warm but firm. "What you need is to stop asking others to restore what you abandoned. You need to face your own silence." Richard swallowed hard. "I don't know if I can fix it." "You don't have to fix everything," she said. "Some things aren't meant to be repaired. They're meant to be released." He looked down, his hands clasped between his knees. "So what happens now?" Evelyn turned back toward the dogwood blossoms. "We keep walking," she said. "Different directions, maybe, but with less weight." He nodded, more to himself than to her. Then he stood, hesitating for a moment. "I meant it," he said, "about how extraordinary you were." She looked up at him, something soft shining in her eyes. "I know." He smiled faintly, then turned and walked back down the path. She watched him go, not with longing, not with regret, just with peace. The wind rustled the leaves above her, and the garden exhaled. The rain began just after dusk. It wasn't loud or urgent, just a quiet, steady whisper against the windows, like the sky had finally exhaled. Evelyn sat in her study, a soft shawl draped over her shoulders, the gentle tick of the grandfather clock marking each passing second with unhurried grace. She had always loved the rain. It made the world slow down. It gave permission to pause. She sipped chamomile tea from her favorite cup, the one with the tiny chip on the rim, the one she never replaced because it felt too much like life, imperfect, but whole. On the desk in front of her lay an envelope, cream-colored, handwritten, no return address, but she knew the handwriting before she even picked it up. "Richard." She stared at it for a long while, her fingers tracing the edge. It was not dread that kept her from opening it, but reverence. She knew whatever was inside had cost him something to write, and it would cost her something to read. Eventually, she unfolded it. Evelyn, I don't know how to begin this, except to say I should have written long ago. There's so much I wish I could say in person, but I've found that silence speaks louder than words ever could, and perhaps this letter is my way of learning how to speak again. You were right. I did stop seeing you, not because you disappeared, but because I grew too afraid of what your clarity revealed in me my smallness, my need for validation, my inability to be still. I used to think power came from being needed. Now I understand that real power is in presence, and you were always present. I remember one morning years ago you stood in this very rain, letting it soak you, barefoot in the garden, laughing at how wild it felt. I told you to come inside. You told me not everything beautiful needs protection. I didn't understand that then. I do now. You were never asking to be rescued, just to be witnessed. I'm sorry I didn't know how. I'm sorry I waited until you had to stand alone to remember the strength you always carried. I know we can't go back, and I don't expect to be part of your future, but I wanted to leave you this, my gratitude, for the foundation you built, for the love you gave, for the mirror you held up to me, even when I refused to look, and for walking away with dignity when you could have burned it all down. You have always deserved more than what I gave, and I will spend the rest of my life learning from the silence you left behind. Richard Evelyn folded the letter with trembling fingers. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't moved, but because something deeper than tears had been touched. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the rain continued, soft as breath, coating the garden in silver. She opened the window slightly. The cool air kissed her cheeks. She closed her eyes and listened not to the rain, but to what it left behind. The next morning, she sat at her desk again, pen in hand. She didn't reply to the letter, but she began writing something new, something for the foundation, a new initiative, a program for young women who had lost their voices in marriages, in families, in systems that taught them to be small. She called it the Witness Project. It would be her legacy, not because of Richard, but because of who she had become when no one else was watching. A few days later, a volunteer came by the estate to pick up archived documents for the new program. As they loaded boxes into the car, the volunteer, barely 20, hopeful and bright, paused. "Mrs. Hartley," she said, "can I ask something?" Evelyn smiled. "Of course. That night at the gala, how did you stay so calm?" Evelyn looked out toward the garden. "I wasn't calm," she said softly. "I was clear." The girl nodded slowly, unsure if she understood. But she would someday. That evening, Evelyn lit a candle and sat with the rain again. She didn't need anything more from Richard, not reconciliation, not revival. But she was glad for the letter, not because it changed what had been, but because it honored what had been real. And sometimes that was enough. The spring air carried a gentle warmth that morning, as if the world itself took a collective breath after a long, cold season. Evelyn Hartley stood at the edge of the South End Community Library's reading lounge, watching as the painting Rise in Silence shimmered softly against the back wall. The crimson and charcoal hues seemed more alive here than under gala lights, a testament to the quiet power she had helped bring into being. Inside, a dozen young women sat at circular tables, their faces bright with possibility, scrubbing through scrap paper, notebooks, laptops. They wore everything from business casual to cozy sweaters, but they all shared the same look: alert, engaged, courageous. She took a slow step inside, letting her presence register without demanding it. She didn't speak at first. She walked between the tables, pausing beside a young woman with a pen hovering over a blank page. "How's the witness project coming along?" she asked gently. The student looked up, surprise and respect in her eyes. "Well, I'm trying to find a way to talk about feeling invisible, but I'm struggling to put it into words." Evelyn nodded knowingly. "Try starting with a moment you felt most unseen, then right through the image. What did you feel? What did you want someone to notice?" The student's fingers found paper. The room buzzed again, no longer with noise, but with purpose. Later in the day, Evelyn stepped outside to a small terrace overlooking the garden. She breathed in deeply, the scent of dogwood blossoms familiar and comforting. The painting on the wall behind her glowed through the window, her commitments now in full circle. This was the future she chose, building spaces where whispers became voices and forgotten dreams found definition. A voice joined her from behind, soft and familiar. "Do you ever miss it?" the volunteer asked. "The gala, the stage, the spotlight." Evelyn turned, her expression kind. "I missed the purpose, but not the spotlight." The volunteer nodded, understanding. "I want that, to be sure of it all." "You don't need to be sure," Evelyn said. "Just be honest. That's how purpose begins." Across town, Richard Hartley stood in front of his own desk. It felt unfamiliar, more empty than it ever had. But his gaze was focused, not distracted. He had cleared the schedule he once filled with meetings. He had canceled trips. He no longer needed to fill silence with noise. He opened a folder he had been avoiding: plans for tomorrow scholars' future funding. And he decided for the first time to step back again, but not away from impact, just away from center stage. He drafted a letter to the board. He would remain a supporter, but let Evelyn steer the foundation's vision entirely. It was time to be a witness, not a driver. Back at home, Evelyn prepared for another evening, reviewing program outlines, meeting with the new board chair, an educator she had mentored years ago. The room felt warm, full of light, of purpose, no echoes, no emptiness. She paused by the window, watching dusk settle on the garden. The rain had washed everything clean. Now the air was soft and hopeful. She thought of Richard's letter, so honest, so tender. It didn't change what was lost, but it gave her permission to keep choosing her own path. That night, she penned a short message to the volunteer and slipped it into her bag. "Thank you for choosing to show up, not to be seen, but to see." She smiled, feeling both the gratitude and the peaceful strength of someone who had walked through fire and come out luminous with intention. The morning was golden. Sunlight filtered through the leaves like falling silk, each ray brushing gently across the stone path that wound through the garden Evelyn once tended alone. Now it was full of life, again freshly planted herbs, blooming lavender, and the delicate white blossoms of the dogwood tree that stood watch over it all. She sat on the wooden bench beneath its shade, the same bench where she had once cried quietly, laughed freely, and sat in silence beside a man she loved deeply, even when the love no longer knew where to go. But today, she wasn't waiting. She was simply being. A small notebook rested on her lap, not for work, not for speeches, just for thoughts, images, little moments she didn't want to forget, like the way the breeze whispered when it passed through tall grass, or how the birds never asked permission to sing. She had learned that healing didn't always come in grand awakenings. Sometimes it came in ordinary things, the smell of soil, the warmth of tea, the sound of your own name spoken with kindness. Footsteps approached, not hurried, familiar. She turned slightly and saw Richard. He looked different now, not younger, not older, just lighter. There was no tension in his shoulders, no rush in his stride. He held a paper bag in one hand. "Good morning," he said. She nodded. "It is. I brought scones," he added, almost shyly, "from that bakery you used to love." "Still do," she said with a faint smile. "Lavender honey." He grinned. "Only the best." He sat beside her, not close, not distant, just near enough for conversation. They shared the scones in quiet bites. There was no need to talk about the past. It was no longer chasing them. After a while, Richard spoke. "I've been helping one of the scholarship students. The one you introduced last year." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Mariah, yes. She wants to study landscape architecture. Reminds me of you, a little. Always asking the why behind everything." Evelyn smiled gently. "That's how you build things that last." He nodded. "I still have the painting. By the way," she said after a pause. He looked at her, surprised. "I thought it was at the library." "It is, but I visit it often." He said nothing, but the way his gaze softened spoke volumes. "I used to think silence meant emptiness," she added. "Now I know. It means space, for new things to grow." They sat together as the wind rustled the dogwood branches. Eventually, Richard stood. "I should go." Evelyn nodded. "Thank you for coming." He looked at her for a long moment, not with longing, not with regret, just a deep, quiet respect for everything he said. Then he walked the path back to his car, the stones crunching gently underfoot. Evelyn watched him disappear behind the garden wall. She didn't cry. She didn't need to, because he had left her with something far greater than promises. He had left her with peace. Later that evening, Evelyn lit a small candle on her windowsill, not for memory, but for light. She wrote in her notebook, "Love doesn't always end. Sometimes it changes its shape, softens its edges, and becomes a place you can visit without pain, a garden you can walk through without needing to be held." She closed the notebook, set it beside the candle, and looked out over the garden, her garden now full of life, of beginnings, of truth. The bench sat quietly beneath the dogwood, waiting, but not for someone to come back. Only for someone to sit down and start again. As we age, life invites us to look back not with regret, but with clarity. This story reminds us that the deepest wounds are not always loud, and the most powerful healing often happens in silence. Evelyn didn't fight for attention. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, She chose dignity over drama, presence over performance. Her journey shows that it's never too late to return to yourself, to the values, dreams, and inner voice that may have been quieted by life's noise. Sometimes, walking away with grace speaks more than staying in pain. And sometimes, forgiveness isn't about restoring the past, it's about freeing your future. For those of us who have loved deeply, lost quietly, or felt invisible in a room full of people, this story is a gentle reminder your worth isn't defined by who notices you. It's defined by who you become when no one is watching. Take your time, stand tall in silence, and trust healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering who you are and choosing peace anyway. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story touched your heart, made you pause, or reminded you of something true, you're not alone. We believe stories have the power to heal, to connect, and to gently awaken something inside us all. If you felt that too, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing meaningful stories to life and to you. Until next time, take care of your heart and keep listening for the quiet stories that speak the loudest.